The rain battered against the tall glass windows of the study, that a relentless drumbeat that echoed through the hollow mansion. In the dim light, Marissa Hale sat motionless in the worn leather chair, a glass of untouched brandy in her trembling hand. Her father's empire, built over 4 decades of sweat and sacrifice, was crumbling into dust before her eyes. "Final notice," the banker's voice had said coldly that afternoon, sliding a thick envelope across the table. "Your family assets will be seized by the end of the month unless repayment is made." End of the month. 2 weeks. Marissa gripped the glass tighter, feeling the fine crystal cut into her palm. Across the room, her mother wept silently, hunched over the fireplace, her once elegant form reduced to a fragile outline. Upstairs, her father lay sedated, his heart too weak to handle the collapse of everything he had built. Marissa closed her eyes. She couldn't cry. Not now. Tears wouldn't save them. The knock came precisely at 7, a heavy sound, deliberate, as if the man on the other side already knew she would open, already knew she had no other choice. She rose slowly, setting the glass down with a clink that sounded deafening in the silence. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she crossed to the door. She opened it. Leon Marquette stood there, the rain painting him in shadow and light. Dark hair slicked back, a black overcoat sharp against the night, his face carved from stone, beautiful in a way that was almost painful, but so cold it burned. "Miss Hale," he said with a polite nod. His voice was a low hum, steady, emotionless. "Mr. Marquette," she whispered, hating how small she sounded. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, shaking the rain from his coat. The scent of stormwater and some dark, expensive cologne filled the air between them. "I assume you've reviewed my offer," he said simply, slipping a leather folder from beneath his coat and placing it on the side table. Marissa stared at the folder as if it might explode. Marriage, not love, not partnership, a contract. "I don't see another way," she said finally, her voice flat. Leon studied her. His eyes were a piercing gray, sharp enough to cut. For a moment, she thought she saw something flicker in them, something almost like pity. But it was gone before she could be sure. "You marry me," he said, voice low, "and I will settle your family's debts. Keep your father's company under your family's name, at least publicly." "And the price?" she said bitterly, crossing her arms. "Besides the obvious." Leon's mouth curled slightly, a mockery of a smile. "No love, no expectations, public appearances only. Behind closed doors, we are indifferent." Marissa's chest tightened painfully. Indifferent, as if she were agreeing to sell her soul for a mortgage payment. "And in 1 year?" she asked, needing to hear it. "Divorce," he said smoothly. "Discreet. You'll be compensated generously for your service." Service. As if she were a hired hand. She wanted to scream, to tell him no, to tell the world that her life wasn't a commodity to be bought and sold. But when she thought of her mother's hollow eyes, her father's failing heart, the thousands of workers who would lose their jobs if Hale Industries collapsed, there was no choice. She was already sold. "Fine," she said, chin lifting, voice steady despite the quiver she felt deep in her bones. "I'll marry you." Leon inclined his head as if sealing a business deal. "I'll have the documents drawn up by morning." Without another word, he turned and walked out into the night, the door swinging shut behind him with a heavy finality. Marissa stood there, the weight of her decision sinking into her skin like lead. 2 weeks later, she stood at the altar, barely feeling her legs under the weight of the wedding gown. The church was beautiful. Old stone, grand chandeliers, golden light filtering through stained glass. Guests whispered behind manicured hands, pretending not to notice the thick tension in the air. Leon looked devastating in his black tailored suit, his expression carved into something cold and unreadable. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, his touch was impersonal, mechanical. When he kissed her cheek, not her lips, she barely felt it. The vows were spoken, signed, sealed. Not a wedding, a transaction. Marissa kept her face still, even as her heart crumbled inside her chest. Later, in the silence of the penthouse hotel suite, their honeymoon night, she sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the ring she couldn't bear to wear. The door to the private study clicked shut down the hall. She didn't mean to eavesdrop. She had only cracked the door open slightly, needing to ask about sleeping arrangements. But she heard his voice, low, edged with something almost cruel. "Keep her alive for the first year," Leon said. "And after that, it's all mine." A pause. Another man's voice, lower and amused. You sure she'll survive that long, Marquette? Leon's reply was a soft, humorless chuckle. No promises. Marissa slammed the door shut quietly, her heart in her throat. She stumbled back into the bedroom, locking the door behind her with shaking fingers. The marriage contract wasn't just cold, it was a death sentence, and she had just signed her own. The city skyline bled into twilight as Marissa adjusted her veil, staring at her reflection without recognition. She looked perfect. At least, that's what the hairstylists and makeup artists had chirped all afternoon. The gown, custom silk imported from Paris, clung to her curves with ruthless precision. Her hair was swept into a classic chignon, a scattering of diamonds catching the light like tears. Perfect. A perfect wife. A perfect pawn. Her stomach twisted. There had been no laughter this morning, no champagne with bridesmaids, no giddy last-minute nerves. Only the heavy tread of duty pressing against her chest until she could barely breathe. The heavy oak door creaked open behind her. Miss Hoft, voice said. It was one of Leon's aides, a woman dressed in crisp black. Efficient, emotionless. They're ready for you. Marissa nodded. She didn't trust herself to speak. The ceremony was held in one of the Marquette family's private estates, a sprawling Gothic mansion perched on the cliffs outside the city. The grand hall, usually reserved for galas and high-stakes negotiations, had been transformed into a cathedral of cold beauty. Hundreds of candles flickered against stone walls, their light swallowed by the high, vaulted ceiling. A string quartet played something elegant and mournful as she walked down the aisle alone. No father to give her away. No friends in the pews. Only strangers with sharp smiles and colder eyes, measuring her worth in whispered assessments. At the far end, Leon waited. He stood like a statue, his black suit immaculate, his gray eyes unreadable beneath the weight of centuries-old chandeliers. For a wild, reckless moment, Marissa thought of running, turning on her heel, tearing off the suffocating dress, and sprinting into the rain-soaked night. But she didn't. She couldn't. Instead, she placed one trembling hand into his outstretched palm. His touch was warm, surprisingly human. It only made it worse. The officiant spoke words that blurred together. Promises of love, fidelity, honor. The words sounded obscene in this place. Marissa forced herself to repeat them, her voice barely above a whisper. When it was Leon's turn, he spoke the vows smoothly, with the polished ease of a man used to sealing deals, not making promises of the heart. The ring was heavy on her finger. Platinum, flawless, colder than ice. When he leaned in to kiss the bride, his lips barely brushed her cheek. A performance, nothing more. Applause rippled politely through the crowd, a sea of strangers celebrating a union built on desperation and deception. The reception blurred by in a haze of stiff conversations and strained smiles. Marissa stood at Leon's side, smiling at the endless parade of guests, CEOs, senators, royalty from obscure countries. She played the role of the perfect bride, nodding and laughing at the right moments, a hat sipping champagne she couldn't taste. Leon, for his part, was the picture of controlled detachment. His hand rested lightly at the small of her back, a gesture that might have seemed intimate to an outsider. To Marissa, it felt like a shackle. Every touch, every glance was choreographed for public consumption. Every second she could feel the clock ticking down toward her unseen death sentence. Hours later, they finally escaped. The suite at the top of the Marquette Hotel was luxurious enough to house a foreign diplomat, towering windows overlooking the city, a private terrace, a grand piano no one would play tonight. Marissa stood awkwardly in the center of the vast living room, feeling like a guest at her own execution. Leon poured himself a drink at the bar, his movements smooth and economical. He didn't offer her one. "You must be tired," he said, voice low but not unkind. She flinched at the sound of it. Ridiculous. She needed to be smarter than that. Colder. "Yes," she managed. There was a long silence. Leon drained his glass in one swallow, then set it down with a soft clink. "I'll be sleeping in the guest room," he said, his tone matter of fact. "There's no need to pretend behind closed doors." Something inside Marissa twisted. Relief and humiliation tangled together in an ugly knot. She nodded stiffly. Leon gave her one last unreadable look, then disappeared down the hall, the door to the study clicking shut behind him. She stood there for a long moment, the silence pressing down like a second skin. Later that night, unable to sleep, Marissa wandered the suite aimlessly. The city glittered below, a million lives unfolding, oblivious to the girl in the gilded cage. She found herself near the study door, paused. A thin sliver of light glowed from beneath it. Voices carried through the crack, muted, but clear enough to make out. She leaned closer, heart hammering against her ribs. Leon's voice, low and hard, keep her alive for the first year. After that, it's all mine. A pause. Another man, amused, almost mocking. You sure she'll survive that long, Marquette? Leon's soft chuckle sliced through her like a blade. No promises. The blood drained from Marissa's face. The walls tilted. The air thinned. She stumbled backward, pressing a hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. Back in the bedroom, she locked the door, bolted it, then shoved a chair under the handle for good measure. Childish, maybe, but she didn't care. She slid to the floor, her wedding dress pooling around her like a broken shell. Silent, frozen, she stared at the wall, hearing his words again and again. Keep her alive for the first year. After that, it's all mine. The ring on her finger burned like acid. She was trapped, in a marriage signed in blood. Counting down to an end she couldn't escape. And the worst part, she still wasn't sure if she wanted to survive just to run or to fight back. Either way, Marissa Hale had just become a player in a deadly game, and she would learn the rules, even if it killed her. Marissa woke to the soft gray of dawn spilling through the penthouse windows. For a few disoriented seconds, she forgot where she was. The vast bed, the glittering skyline, the suffocating weight on her chest, it all came rushing back with a brutal, ugly clarity. The wedding, the overheard conversation. Keep her alive for the first year. Her fingers twisted the wedding ring still on her hand, a band of cold platinum that now felt like a shackle. Across the suite, the door to the guest room remained closed. Leon's room. She hadn't seen him since last night, hadn't heard a single footstep. It was better this way, she told herself. Distance, caution, survival. The rules of this game were simple now. Play the perfect wife. Smile, nod, obey, and find a way out before her year was up or before he decided to cut it short. Marissa dressed carefully that morning, choosing a soft ivory blouse and a navy skirt. Elegant but modest. The kind of outfit a CEO's wife would wear. The kind of image the press expected. At breakfast, she found Leon already seated at the marble dining table, a cup of black coffee in one hand, a tablet in the other. His dark hair was still slightly damp from the shower, the faintest hint of stubble on his jaw. The sight of him, so composed, so devastatingly beautiful, made her stomach twist with something she refused to name. Good morning, she said quietly, forcing a pleasant smile. Leon looked up, his gray eyes scanning her face with cool precision. Morning, he said, voice even, no warmth, no cruelty either, just nothing. She took her seat across from him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. There was an untouched plate of croissants between them, a pot of fresh coffee, the kind of breakfast you'd expect in a glossy magazine spread. Fake. Polished. Hollow. Marissa poured herself a cup, pretending not to notice the way his gaze lingered on her for a fraction of a second too long. You have a full schedule today, Leon said, sliding a printed itinerary across the table. She scanned it quickly. Morning, brunch with the Marquette family investors' wives. Afternoon, charity luncheon. Evening, photo shoot for a society magazine spread. Marissa's throat tightened. She was on display. Not a woman, an ornament. Leon must have seen something flicker across her face because his mouth tightened slightly. I can cancel the magazine shoot, he said abruptly. You're not obligated to participate in every... No, she interrupted, shaking her head quickly. I understand. It's part of the role. Another part of the contract she hadn't needed to sign with ink. Expectation, whispered and unspoken, weighed heavier than words. Leon nodded once, almost approvingly. Good, he said. You're adapting faster than I expected. The words stung more than they should have. The brunch was worse than she imagined. Dozens of women dressed in haute couture smiled with perfectly lacquered lips, their eyes sharp and assessing behind layers of mascara. Marissa played the part well, laughing when appropriate, asking polite questions, sipping at her mimosa with practiced ease. But beneath the surface, she cataloged everything. The way they spoke of alliances, rivalries, scandals disguised as charity. The way her name, Marissa Marquette, was already being whispered with a mixture of envy and suspicion. She realized something quickly. In this world, survival wasn't about kindness. It was about power. and right now, she had none. At the charity luncheon, the same pattern repeated. More smiles, more glassy conversations about stocks, mergers, investments. Leon appeared briefly, arriving midway through the event, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that made every head turn. When he approached her table, Marissa stood instinctively. He offered his arm, the perfect image of a devoted husband, and she slid her hand into the crook of his elbow, her smile never faltering. "Mrs. Marquette," he murmured, the title tasting strange and heavy between them. "You're performing beautifully." A strange compliment, but she clung to it, because performance was survival, because she needed him to believe she was harmless, because somewhere deep inside her, a colder part whispered, "Let him underestimate you." That night, after the photo shoot, Marissa collapsed onto the bed, exhausted down to her bones. She peeled off the diamond earrings, the designer gown, the mask she'd worn all day. The penthouse was silent again. Leon had disappeared into his study hours ago, the door firmly closed. Marissa stood by the window, looking out over the glittering city lights. How many lives continued out there, unaware of the girl in the golden cage? How many people believed love was a luxury, not a trap? She pressed her forehead to the cool glass, closing her eyes. She thought of her father's frail body in the hospital bed, her mother's trembling hands clutching a prayer book, the workers who still had jobs today because she had sacrificed herself. It's worth it, she told herself. It has to be. The alternative, that she had made a deal with the devil for nothing, was too unbearable to face. At midnight, unable to sleep, she heard movement, soft footsteps down the hall. Instinct made her freeze, every muscle coiling tight, but she forced herself to relax. She cracked the door open slightly. Leon stood by the window at the end of the corridor, staring out at the city. He didn't see her. The moonlight caught the edge of his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows. Not cold, not cruel, haunted. Marissa frowned, confused. This wasn't the face of a man savoring the thought of murder. This was the face of a man at war with something invisible. A shiver worked its way down her spine. The pieces didn't fit. The cold, calculating Leon Marquette she'd seen in the study last night wasn't the man standing there now. Unless he was playing a role too. The realization unsettled her more than anything else, because if Leon wasn't just the villain, if he was something more complicated, more broken, then falling for him wouldn't just be stupid. It would be fatal. Marissa closed the door softly, pressing her back to it, heart pounding. She had to remember who he was, what he'd promised. Keep her alive for the first year. No matter what cracks she thought she saw, no matter what fleeting moments of humanity shimmered through, Leon Marquette was a man who would kill her if it suited his needs. And she would be a fool to forget it. Marissa wasn't naive enough to think she could survive by being passive. If Leon Marquette intended to kill her after a year, she needed information, leverage, anything that could help her outmaneuver him before the clock ran out. She spent the next week mastering the art of invisibility. Perfect wife in public, shadow in private. She smiled at the charity galas, posed for glossy magazine spreads, accepted congratulations with flawless grace. She made herself indispensable at Leon's side, the kind of wife no businessman would discard easily. But behind the polished facade, she observed, listened, learned. Leon was a fortress. He kept a rigid schedule. Long hours at the Marquette Corporation headquarters downtown, endless strategy meetings, private calls that he always took behind locked doors. He was polite to her, even considerate at times. But there was always a line, drawn in invisible ink, that she wasn't allowed to cross. And yet, Marissa noticed the small things. The way his hand lingered an extra second at the small of her back in front of the board members. The faint tension in his jaw whenever she laughed at someone else's joke a little too brightly. Moments that didn't fit the cold-blooded killer she knew he was. It made her chest ache with something dangerous. Hope. She crushed it ruthlessly. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. It was during one of the charity galas that opportunity struck. Leon was cornered by two elderly investors arguing about merger terms. Marissa drifted toward the private corridor behind the ballroom, escaping the noise for a moment's breath. That's when she noticed it. A slim silver laptop case tucked behind one of the marble pillars. Leon's. She recognized the discreet monogram embossed on the corner. It must have slipped from his briefcase during the chaos. Without thinking, Marissa slipped it into her clutch. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure someone could hear. Back at the penthouse, she locked herself in the guest bathroom, the only room without surveillance cameras, and cracked open the laptop. Password protected, of course. She stared at the login screen, panic tightening her throat. There was no way she could guess. She paused. In their first week of marriage, Leon's assistant had given her a list of important dates she needed to memorize. His schedule? Upcoming conferences, the annual Marquette Gala. One date had been circled twice, Leon's mother's death anniversary. Marissa typed in the date 0615. The screen blinked once and unlocked. She almost laughed, almost cried. He was human after all. The laptop was meticulously organized. Financial records, business emails, merger contracts, but tucked deep in a hidden folder buried beneath layers of innocuous files, Marissa found something else. Encrypted documents, dozens of them. She opened one at random, her breath catching. Confidential, ownership transfer clause, Marissa Hale Marquette. Ownership transfer? Her heart skipped. The legal jargon was dense, but the implications were chilling. In the event of Marissa's death, accidental or otherwise, her shares in the Marquette Corporation would immediately revert to Leon. No contest, no delay, not to her family, not to any charitable trust, straight to him. It was a death sentence written in polite legalese, and she had signed it. Blind, desperate, stupid. A soft knock at the bathroom door made her jump violently. Marissa? Leon's voice, low and cautious. You all right? She slammed the laptop shut, shoving it behind her dress, heart hammering. Yes, she called out, pitching her voice light. Just fixing my makeup. A pause, then his retreating footsteps moving back toward the living room. She waited a full minute before exhaling shakily. The laptop case burned against her hip like a brand. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay rigid under the silk sheet, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between each breath. Leon was going to kill her. It wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was fact. The contract, the overheard conversation, the cold professionalism with which he approached their marriage, it was all part of a plan. And yet, her mind kept circling back to the way he had stood by the window that night, unaware she was watching. The haunted look on his face, the way he had pulled her gently behind him at a press conference when a photographer stumbled too close, shielding her without thinking. If he was truly ruthless, why did these cracks keep showing? Was it guilt? Second thoughts? Or something worse, something she couldn't afford to understand? In the small hours of the morning, restless and reckless, Marissa slipped from bed. The penthouse was silent, bathed in silver moonlight. She padded barefoot down the hallway, heart hammering. Leon's study door was ajar. Unusual. Inside, she found him asleep on the leather sofa, a half-empty glass of scotch on the table, papers scattered across his chest. He looked exhausted. Lines of tension bracketed his mouth. The tailored armor of his suits, the cold precision, all stripped away. Just a man. And for one dangerous moment, Marissa let herself drift closer. She didn't touch him, didn't dare, but she memorized the sight of him, the vulnerability he would never willingly show. A foolish, traitorous part of her ached. She turned to leave, careful not to make a sound, but her foot caught the edge of a stack of books, knocking them over with a soft thud. Leon jerked awake instantly, his hand reaching for something under the cushion. A gun, she realized with a jolt. His eyes locked onto her, sharp, feral. Marissa? His voice was rough with sleep, suspicion flashing. She froze. I'm sorry, she said quickly, forcing her breathing to slow. I couldn't sleep. I heard something. For a long, terrible second, they just stared at each other. Hunter and prey. Husband and wife. Then, slowly, Leon set the weapon aside. You shouldn't wander at night, he said, his voice softer now, almost resigned. It's not safe? A bitter smile curved her lips before she could stop it. Leon didn't answer. Instead, he ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. Go back to bed, Marissa, he said quietly. Please. Not a command, a plea. And that scared her more than any threat ever could. Back in her room, she locked the door, sagging against it. The laptop was still hidden in the bottom drawer. The truth was sitting right there, undeniable. Leon Marquette was a man who might save her one day, or destroy her the next. And somehow, terrifyingly, she was starting to realize It wasn't hatred that would be her undoing. It was the way her heart fluttered at the sound of his voice, the way loneliness wrapped around her ribcage whenever she caught a glimpse of his real self. The real danger wasn't just Leon, it was herself. And just like that, the first part of their battle had come to a close. With the stakes higher than ever and the tension between them simmering beneath the surface, it was clear that the true fight was just beginning. The truth had been exposed, alliances had been tested, and both Leon and Marissa were standing on the precipice of a decision that could change everything. But the journey was far from over. What will happen when the lies unravel further? Can Marissa truly trust the man she's falling for, or will the past come back to haunt them both? The answers are just around the corner. Stay tuned for part 2 of The Marriage Contract. Subscribe now and don't miss the twists, turns, and revelations that lie ahead.